Good rising, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. I am Tayla Andre. Waking up with Tayla Andre has absolutely nothing to do with the time of day that we link up, but about waking up your third eye with unorthodox conversations leading to universal consciousness. Today is the day that the Lord hath made, and I am glad in it. So today we are interviewing the American lawyer and politician serving as the U.S. representative for Massachusetts' 4th Congressional District, and he is running as senator against Ed Markey. We have Joe Kennedy III, not really in the building, but he's here with us virtually since it's Corona time. And so we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to waste it. We're not going to tiptoe. First, we're going to go into some of the personal questions that Tayla Andre, have, and then we have questions coming in from constituents that would like one-on-ones with Joe in the form of their questions. So first and foremost, if I was to be blind and could not hear, and I was only to read the differences between you and Ed Markey, it looks like I'm voting for the same person. What is, using I statements, the true difference between you two?
The way I define the job of being a United States Senator. And look, I think, I believe that there's much more to this position than just the votes that you cast and the bills that you file. That with being a United States Senator comes an opportunity, an obligation, or a responsibility to fight with everything you have for the people and the communities you represent. And I think I would do that differently than the senator. And here's what I mean. One, it's about being present. It's about being in our communities. It's about being in literally relationship with other members in the community, because I don't think that you can say that you are going to help lead communities if you do not have a presence there. You can't lead Massachusetts if you do not live here. You cannot help lead communities like Dorchester and Roxbury, Mattapan, leverage the powers of your office and help empower residents and community activists and leaders there if you don't know who. That's one. I would say that you'd be leading that fight in Washington, D.C. The senator hasn't been nearly as present in Washington. He's missed about 50% of his votes since COVID-19 pandemic started, when we need representation there. 3, I will help bring about the change that we need to deliver on these policies. In 2018, when Republicans had the House, the Senate, the presidency, and we needed to drive change in order to pass policies and help lift up our communities and to hold this administration accountable, I was in dozens of districts across the country, nearly 20 states. The senator went literally nowhere. And lastly, Ms. Andre, the most basic responsibility of this job is that when people come to you to ask for help, you help. So when Dan and Angela Henry came to talk to me about seeking justice for their son who was murdered by a white police officer in Westchester County, New York, I did everything I could. We've pushed on the Justice Department. We pushed on the authorities in New York. I brought them down to be guests at the State of the Union, introduced them to colleagues. We're still pushing on folks in D.C. and Washington, working through other Senate colleagues, doing everything we can. And let me be clear about this. We haven't brought justice for their son. I haven't been wholly successful, but I've tried. Around the same time, they met with Senator Markey. Over lunch, they were dismissed. He did not pay attention. They felt insulted, and according to Mr. Henry's words, and he used the word colored in the middle of the meeting. He also never did anything to help. The only thing the senator did was to sign on to 2 letters that I wrote. And I wholeheartly disagree with the fact that it is sufficient that if a mom and dad came to you seeking justice for their murdered son to a United States senator, that's the difference.
You're breaking up a little bit. You broke up a couple times during that last sentence regarding DJ Henry's family meeting with Ed Markey. And so I just wanted to be clear that he said that he sponsored, he signed on to 2 letters that Joe wrote, but he didn't necessarily do anything himself. Piggybacking
is the connection choppy?
Again? It is.
Is the connection choppy? Hold on.
Well, wait.
Let me see if I can see if that was better. Hello?
Yep, I'm here. You're frozen, but I'm here.
Gone. Hello?
It's like verses all over again.
There we go. How about that? Back?
That's better. You're still frozen, but I can hear you. In regards to Breonna Taylor, have any efforts been made from you or your staff to push her killers to actually being like brought to justice?
Yes, and I've spoken out about what happened to Miss Taylor, and are urging her killers to be brought to justice. We've obviously I've led legislation to end no-knock warrants, which is what happened obviously in that case, as you well know. And we'll continue to do everything we can to make sure that those the killers there are brought to justice. And Ms. Andre, there was a case in Framingham, Massachusetts, similar circumstances with regards to Yuri Stamps that you might be familiar with. Mr. Stamps was killed. He was 68 years old, no criminal record. He was killed in a SWAT team raid of his house because the police were looking for suspected narcotics activity there involving somebody else that lived there. They stormed the house early morning, about 1 a.m. is my recollection. Flash grenades batted down the door. Mr. Stamps was watching the Celtics game. He was on the ground, hands behind his head, completely compliant when a gun went off and he was shot and killed. No indication that he did anything wrong, no resisting, no nothing. And he was killed. There was a vigil demanding justice for Yuri Stamps last Saturday that I attended with Mayor Yvonne Spicer to try to demand justice for Yuri and to seek another set of eyes on that case. I was there. I spoke out, and will continue to do so. Senator Markey, once again, sent a letter.
We have cases here in Boston. I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong to the viewers, I believe it was in 2015. There was a Muslim man who was shot and killed in front of a bus load of children in Roslindale. He did have a knife, but we have bombers that were able to be apprehended without being killed. Yet, for me, the case, forgive me, I can't even think of the gentleman's name. And
I remember the Mass State Police case, if I remember correctly, I believe.
Yeah.
So
the question is around policy. Like, when it comes to policy, what legislative, what laws do you plan to put in place for like common sense? Like, what about shooting people in the leg? What about shooting people, like, to apprehend them versus killing them and not getting the justice on both sides? For the family doesn't get justice for whatever crime that they may have committed. And then the family that just lost a loved one doesn't receive any justice when the police is like, oh, we were just doing our job.
So I think there's a lot there, obviously, and take your example. Obviously, let's try to make sure nobody has to take out a gun and shoot anybody. And I think that's one of the big points. And if I remember that case correctly, and forgive me if I'm not, but if I remember that case correctly, I think there was actually a long history of mental illness there, and there was a gentleman with a knife. And Ms. Andre, my main area of focus in Washington has been on healthcare, and particularly focus on mental and behavioral health and expanding access to mental and behavioral healthcare. Why? Because, as you're probably aware, the two largest providers of mental health care in our country are the jails in LA and Chicago. You talk to the sheriffs, the folks that run our jails here in Massachusetts, they'll tell you that on any given night, between 80 and 90% of the incarcerated individuals suffer from mental illness or substance use disorder or both. And so you run through that scenario or many other ones like it, right? And let's use this as a hypothetical because I don't want to mischaracterize the facts of that specific case. But an individual is disassociating. Maybe he's brandishing a weapon. You have police officers that respond because somebody says, hey, there's a guy with a knife, so police show up. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a police officer that might not have any sort of de-escalation training, mental health training otherwise, with a guy who is, by definition, not necessarily behaving rationally. And now, all of a sudden, you've got a recipe for disaster because you're putting people in a position where you are not necessarily set up for success, but you are rolling the dice, certainly on And maybe sometimes, and without question, sometimes this does end peacefully, but you do this enough and it's not going to. So what do we need to do? Wholeheartedly readdress the way that how we got there in the first place. And that means things like, and this is a big priority of mine, completely redefining the way in which we deliver mental and behavioral health care in this country. And if we did that, you would actually see, and addiction services, by the way, you would see the number of people that end up in this position, or in a position where they are interacting with police. Because what happens when somebody is, and this is still our reaction as a society, you see somebody suffering with mental illness that is walking down the street, harassing somebody else, harassing people at McDonald's as they're trying to eat their food. What do? We call the cops. And now the police are the ones that have to be frontline mental health workers trying to provide those services if they don't have any of the training. And that shouldn't be seen as a law enforcement issue. That needs to be seen as a mental health issue, a public health issue, where we guarantee the access to the services that we need. So one big piece to this, and it is a big piece to this, is around the provision, and not just coverage, but provision, access, administration, wraparound services of mental behavioral health care, right? Like that's got to be a big piece to this too.
And that is a big piece, but what role does legislation play when it comes to officers having proper training to deal with these type of issues?
So huge. So first off, like let's actually address that public health crisis as the public health crisis. Let's then redefine the role of a police officer from saying, hey, let's not put on your shoulders to make you a emergency mental health response team. Let's get an emergency mental health response team to help that person. And let's make sure that police officers are focused off of what should be law enforcement and not ask them to do far too many things that they are not actually equipped or trained or have the capability or means to actually be able to do. And that means redefining, and I think redefining how we police in this country. It also means the provision of resources further upstream. Again, mental behavioral health care, housing, economic opportunity, otherwise.
So are you suggesting creating a mental health task force that in place of police head out to situations? I
think so. A couple pieces to that. And the short answer is yes, essentially. But one, if you actually fleshed out our mental behavioral healthcare system to begin with, you'd have far less people that ended up at the point of serious mental illness where they are homeless and in need of that type of interaction, right? One. Two, there are police departments already that are essentially trying to train and equip specialty teams for mental behavioral health response. Why? Because they also recognize that this is not the best use of their own resources. And that if you don't have people that are equipped with the necessary training and tools, then you're putting people that you're rolling the dice or increasing the risk of a catastrophic failure. And that's not good for anybody. And so, but my point is, let's not leave it to individual police departments to be able to have the resources and kind of forward thinking to do that. One, we can legislate part of that, but two, let's actually make that healthcare investment upfront. So that's a big place I would start. And again, as I said, the other aspects here, housing, education, economic opportunity. And the last one here that I think doesn't get talked about nearly enough, Ms. Andre, childcare, right?
So that was actually the next question, because I attended a panel at the Institute for the Edward Kennedy Institute, and your wife was speaking. She was on the panel speaking about childcare, and that was an event that I attended. Prince was, I think, 8 months at the time. And, as a new mom, so I have a 16-year-old, I have a 15-year-old, and now Prince is 2. And having a 2-year-old, healthcare is childcare is $17,000 a year. And that's if you're going to, literally a basement, 700 square feet with somebody's grandmother. That's not an actual facility that, maybe your children attend or attended when they were younger. $17,000 when we know that 50% of Bostonians make less than $30,000 a year, and not everybody can get access to a childcare voucher because of the systems that you have to go through. And that was the next question. As far as legislation is concerned, how do we streamline this process so that any child that is brought into this world into the United States, your constituent area, how will these children be able, or parents be able, to get them into a facility that can not only take care of the child, but has the resources that they need? And it's a whole 2-hour conversation speaking about childcare and the problems that we have as a society. But I'm really interested in knowing, like, you can't shortchange someone. And we've known this through Corona, like dealing with our children, educating our children. We know that they're worth every penny that they charge, if not more. So we can't shortchange them. But at the same time, $17,000 a year is a lot of money. Like, where is the happy medium legislatively?
So there's a lot here, right? And I think what you just outlined is, you didn't quite frame it this way, is that I married up, which is also very true. I will do my best here to recite what my wife has taught me about this. And adding on to a couple of facts here, because I think it's important, but you laid out the case, I think, beautifully. The average cost of childcare across the state is roughly, as you said, about $17,000, $20,000 per year. It's actually higher in Boston. It's closer to 30 average. That's built off of a system that already drastically underpays providers who are, as you also know, disproportionately women of color, right? So this is it's an exploitation of families because very few can afford $30,000 per child per year. But that money doesn't flow down to the actual provider, who is essentially getting paid a minimum wage or they're close thereto. And again, disproportionately women of color. It's built off of a system where we're seeing massive failures, economic failures of childcare centers across the country, because it's essentially a membership model. And we haven't been able to send kids to childcare centers because of COVID. And so we are in a childcare crisis. We need to dramatically rethink the way in which we conceptualize this, again, for two big pieces. One, this model was built, Ms. Andre, off of the idea of an economic model that existed for our country for a long time, that one parent worked and one parent took care of the kids. Normally, dad worked, mom took care of the kids. And dad's job was enough to pay a mortgage and to pay your rent and to meet your basic needs. That is no longer the case. Our generation has been devastated economically now twice, from the worst recession in generation 10 years ago to the next worst recession now. And we are in a worse position to actually climb out of it than any other generation in American history. Worse. Our kids are now on the front lines of that, which has a potential devastating generational impact. And women, in particular women of color, are at it even more disproportionately impacted from it. So that's one piece. The second is the complete disconnect that we have with our education system, because we believe that public education is almost the definition of a public good in this country, right? Every child, no matter your background, economic level, anything else, special needs, from 5 on through high school, we find you a way to get education, varying quality, varying degree, but like, you get education. And the quality and degree, I don't mean to minimize, there's a lot to that, but for the sake of it. Why do we think that from birth to 5 is on the individual parent? Why do we think that when 90% of brain development happens by age 5, those formative years, we think that that is on the family to be able to find a way, particularly when that costs so much? It shouldn't be. It can't be. And if we actually equalized that academic opportunity early on from birth to 5, that means you don't see an education gap that has already widened by kindergarten, that we now put on a teacher to try to say, okay, you even it out. Like, this is a fundamental reconception, but it shouldn't be, of what the definition of education and a public good is, to say, if we believe it's a public good that starts at age 5, let's just make it start at birth. We already believe it's a public good.
Lauren did an amazing job with you.
I listen. Well, there you go.
So,
last piece real quick. That is a massive, massive opportunity to level an equitable playing field, particularly for communities of color and lower income families that can't otherwise afford access to those childcare programs, because we even that out and we actually put those kids on a level playing field for another generation. And every economic study will tell you some of the best money that the federal government can spend, a return on investment from 9 to 1 to 13 to 1, depending on it. And Ms. Andre, recent studies out of University of Chicago, it benefits not only my daughter, who's 4, it will benefit my daughter's granddaughter. It will benefit your Prince's grandchild. That's what this does. So it's time.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. One of your big cornerstones of your legislation is STEM. Here in the city of Boston, we have Madison Park, which is absolutely amazing. I attended a technical school, and the 2 weeks of figuring out which shop you want to be in was the most fun of my entire high school career. What can we see as far as legislation is concerned regarding more technical opportunities here in the city of Boston? We have one technical school. There's the Canton. I can't think of the name of the tech school in Canton, but it's like renowned as one of the best. But if you're a Bostonian, you can't attend. We have parents lying on applications education in the city of Boston overall sucks, period. And it's crazy because we are the hub of education for this country. So this really isn't a question. It's more of a proposal and maybe some food for thought. So we have the in lieu of tax, because we have all of these the hospitals that don't pay taxes. We have all of these colleges that don't pay taxes, and they're supposed to be paying that in lieu of tax. We know through studies that they're not even paying 10% of the in lieu that they're supposed to be paying. Why or how or what is the possibility of, fine, you don't want to pay anything. What you're going to do is provide resources. You're going to provide, whether they're educators, whether it's space, whether it's your technology room, whether it's your science room. The fact that we are the hub of medicine for the United States, yet we don't have any schools that have relationship programs, like a dual enrollment type situation with any of these schools. And from what I understand, my mom's a nurse and we have a shortage of nurses. And so we should be grooming some of these children that want to be nurses. We have everything that we need. So where is the relationship between the two in order to strengthen our schools while also leveraging the resources that we have access to that are just dormant?
How much time do you want to spend on that one?
Well, technically, we only have 8 minutes and only about 45 minutes worth of questions left. So I don't know how we're going to do this.
Okay. So yes, is the short answer there, right? What we have seen, Massachusetts has some of the best vocational technical schools in the country. When I gave the response to Donald Trump's State of the Union back 4 years ago now, I guess 3 years ago, I gave it from a vocational school to talk about, to frame not only the work that they did in the extraordinary educational opportunities there, but I did it from Fall River. The median household income in Fall River at the time was about $34,000 a year, Ms. Andre. A graduate of that school a couple of years out could be making well into $75,000, $80,000, right? You have doubled the household income by the time the kid is 22 years old with no debt. I mean, it's extraordinary, right? So what do we have to do there? An awful lot of things, right? And there's obviously some of the first bills that I passed in Congress were around racial equity in STEM and career and technical education, right? Both. So to tie directly into the points that you just made. I've done work. I'm still the honorary co-chair of the STEM Council, which was a creation of the Deval Patrick and Tim Murray administration to actually help increase public-private partnerships with STEM. So along with Vertex Pharmaceuticals, which is extraordinary company that's been looking at cures for cystic fibrosis, amongst other conditions, they have partnerships with some of the Boston public schools to actually provide resources, mentoring opportunities for kids in those schools to actually highlight and extend and expand some of those opportunities and actually involve companies, particularly actually in the medical community and healthcare community, to say, hey, the opportunities that we have here are along these pairing up with mentorships, relationships, internship opportunities. That's been a big push for them to say, particularly in the summers, let's get some of these kids, if we've been able to train them and get them up to speed on some parts of a curriculum in high school, let's now get them in the door as interns and actually show them what that potential can be if you stick with that education, depending on what major you want to go into, and what opportunities are there for you when you come out the other side. And so there's an awful lot more that needs to be done, that can be done if we actually leverage this the right way between state allocation of funding, additional federal support and legislation to incentivize it, and then aggressive courtship of a private sector to actually help scale up those opportunities to provide people a pathway to a really good, high quality job.
I agree. So we literally have 4 minutes. Do you think we could stretch that out to maybe 10?
I'm not sure I can do 10, but we can probably do, I'm looking at you. Can we do 7? 7. We can do 7.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead.
You want to do 5 questions all at once? I'll write them down and give them.
Worst case scenario, I'll email them. So one of the questions was around student loan debt and your take on student loan debt, trillions of dollars. I personally, if you could take care to 75,000, I love you. You got my vote. But student loan debt.
So $1.7 trillion of student loan debt. It is an albatross around the neck of a generation of Americans that we've never before put on a generation of Americans. We've always guaranteed a pathway to a middle-class job that was publicly funded. It used to be a high school degree. It's not anymore. And instead, we put the burden on the individual student and their family to afford. I'm on bills that, 1, provide for debt-free education, and 2, would wipe out a big portion of that student, 95% of student loan debt. Okay.
Really quickly, domestic violence awareness advocate would like to know, how would you impose stricter laws on abusers that own firearms and aid in more awareness campaigns in different languages against domestic violence?
So great question. I was a former domestic violence prosecutor. And I saw that, I mean, these are some of the most horrifying cases you come out, you will see, and it's the most predictable form of homicide, I think, as you know. One, increasing access to resources has been a big priority of mine. I actually passed the POWER Act through Congress. My Republican co-lead in the Senate was a guy, Dan Sullivan from Alaska, that mandated federal courts to provide trainings and access to resources for domestic violence victims and domestic violence awareness in additional languages, because, as you said, for some there are actually resources out there, but people don't know them and know about them because, again, not trying to tell you something you don't already know, but it's a crime of power and isolation. And as that victim gets more and more isolated, those access to resources and safety net becomes harder and harder to reach. So wholeheartedly, and I've legislated on this and will continue to be a priority of mine. And thank you for the question.
Awesome. So AMI, I'm a real estate agent. AMI is killing us, area median income. Okay. We know that Boston as a whole, 50% of Bostonians make less than $30,000 a year, yet AMI is $98,000 because we congressionally are including Newton, Brighton, Alston, like we're including aspects of Boston that aren't Boston. And so I'm really wondering, do you plan on helping to redraw these lines so we can have a fair and equitable AMI for the city of Boston?
So that's actually a new one. Short answer is, let me look into it. Absolutely. Look, if you're looking at the implication of area median income and you are highlighting communities that have a disproportionate percentage at essentially a federal poverty line, or slightly above, and wealthy suburbs like Brookline and Newton, the median income there is going to be stratified, right? And not reflective of the communities, by the way, either one of them, right? And so happy to learn a little bit more about it and send up whatever info over, but happy to. Absolutely.
I'm happy to sit at that table. So also on the congressional level, we have, I am the daughter of a veteran. I'm the granddaughter of a veteran. Veterans are my heartbeat, right? My grandmother lives as comfortably as she does because she is the wife of a veteran. And so I take nothing away from our veterans, but I do want to recognize that our police officers, our firefighters, our MBTA police if you are a veteran from Alaska, you get first preference over a Bostonian that has been here their entire life, that received a 98 on the written exam. But because you're a veteran, you get 1 extra point. I am suggesting, what does it look like for you to knock down that veteran 1 point so that a Bostonian can have that extra point towards becoming whatever it is that they are applying for? Because we have an abundance of Black, brown, us that are applying for these jobs and not getting them. And not because our scores are not high enough, but because they are not veterans, and veterans are receiving first preference?
So I think that is a great question. I would welcome the chance to kind of dive into that a little bit more. I agree with you in the inequity there, but also don't want to penalize our veterans. I think what that also means is that we need to create opportunities here for people to be able to get access to those jobs. And that has been the heart of the work that I've done. Particularly, I put forth an entire overhaul to our economic system called the moral capitalism to try to actually create a place where there are, in fact, more robust middle-class jobs, because what we're seeing is a competition over those finite resources because we've got an economy that doesn't actually allow people with the skills and training to be able to enter those professions. And so I think we need to find an equitable way of doing that, one, but the larger, broader point here is you need to expand access to the middle class. And that's been my area of focus.
All right. You sit on the Energy Commerce Committee. We know that big oil runs the world. What efforts will you be making to make solar energy more affordable and equitable for homeowners? Because I've looked into it. It's quite expensive. It's worth it, but it's quite expensive. And not just solar, but I know it's like a really bad word in politics, but how do we get greener?
So, and I apologize, this last one quick here. So a couple things. One, yes, and I've been a big supporter of some of the tax credits that help lower that cost, from the investment tax credit to the production tax credit, and for alternative energy, period. We need to go through this revolution, which is part of that is at least aspirationally described in the Green New Deal. But we need to then actually legislate on it. And this has been, I've done a huge part of my work, Ms. Andre, has been focused on creating an entire offshore wind industry, because just off the coast of southeastern New England, we have the potential to literally rewrite our energy and economic future. The first offshore wind farm there alone is enough to power 400,000 homes on completely green and renewable energy. 400,000. So we have this enormous opportunity to do this right with the federal support and assistance to actually make sure that energy comes back in and powers New England. And this has been a big focus of mine for the past 5 or 6 years. And I hope it'll continue to be, obviously, in the U.S. Senate. And thank you so much for having me. I am grateful to you and grateful for you, and hope that we can do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Again, Joe Kennedy III, I do appreciate you, and we love you. We appreciate you. And if you make it there, we hope to see you in the community as much as you are here now.
You got it. I look forward to it. You be well. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Vote on September 1st, if not before.